The first thing Senior Chief Harker said when he saw her step off the helicopter was, "What is this? Take your daughter to work day." Specialist Mira Okonkwo stood 5 feet tall in her boots, 98 pounds with her rifle and pack, and looked like she should be worrying about prom dates instead of deployment rotations. She did not respond. She had learned years ago that her mouth would never win the battles her rifle could. The rotor wash whipped dust across FOB Cobra as she walked toward the waiting soldiers. Her M110 sniper rifle slung across her back, looking almost comically large against her tiny frame. The SEAL team stood in a loose cluster near the landing zone, arms crossed, faces ranging from amused to openly hostile. 8 operators, each one at least a foot taller than her, each one with the kind of muscle mass that came from years of brutal training. And every single one of them was staring at her like she was a lost child who had wandered onto a battlefield. Senior Chief Dominic Harker stepped forward, blocking her path. He was 6'2", 220 pounds of combat-tested operator with 12 years of deployments carved into the hard lines of his face. He looked down at Mira the way someone might look at a particularly unconvincing Halloween costume. "I requested a sniper attachment," he said, "not a mascot. Someone want to tell me why the Army sent me a 12-year-old. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who was constantly underestimated because of how they looked." Mira kept her eyes forward, her face carefully blank. She had heard variations of this speech at every duty station, every training course, every qualification she had ever attended. The words changed, but the message stayed the same. You do not belong here. You are too small, too young, too female. Go home. She never went home. Master Sergeant Elias Vance pushed through the cluster of SEALs, his Army uniform a stark contrast to their Navy combat gear. He was 45 years old with a face weathered by 20 years of deployments and eyes that had seen things he would never discuss. When he looked at Mira, something flickered across his expression. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "Specialist Okonkwo," he said, and his voice carried a weight that made the SEALs glance at each other. "Welcome to Cobra. I will show you to your quarters." Harker did not move from her path. "I do not care what paperwork command sent down," he said. "She is not going outside the wire with my men. Not until I see proof she can handle herself." Mira finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Where would you like that proof, Senior Chief?" "The range. The field." She met his eyes without flinching. "Name a place." Something shifted in Harker's expression. Not respect, not yet, but perhaps a flicker of uncertainty. He had expected tears, maybe, or anger. Not this absolute stillness, this calm that seemed almost unnatural in someone who looked young enough to be his daughter. "Range," he said finally. "Tomorrow morning. 0600. You will shoot against Ghost." He gestured toward a lean operator with cold eyes and a sniper rifle of his own. "If you cannot outshoot my worst marksman, you stay on base. Permanently." Ghost was not Harker's worst marksman. Mira knew this the moment she saw him. The way he held himself, the calluses on his trigger finger, the custom modifications on his rifle. Petty Officer Second Class Jerome Washington was a killer, and Harker knew exactly what he was doing by putting her against him. "Understood," Mira said. Vance led her away from the SEALs, across the dusty compound toward a row of plywood buildings that served as quarters. Behind them, she could hear laughter. Someone said something about babysitting duty. Someone else wondered if she was old enough to drive. "Do not let them get to you," Vance said quietly. "They do not know what you are." "With respect, Master Sergeant," Mira replied, "neither do you." Vance stopped walking. He turned to face her, and again that flicker of recognition crossed his features. "I knew your father," he said. "Thomas Okonkwo. We served together at Bragg, before he went to regiment." Myra's hand moved involuntarily to her pocket, where her father's worn rosary rested against her thigh. She had carried it every day since the notification officers came to their door 5 years ago, since the flag and the medals and the words that meant nothing. "He was a good man," Vance continued, "a hell of a soldier, and from what I have heard, an even better sniper. He taught me everything," Mira said softly. Vance nodded slowly. "Then show them tomorrow. Show them what Thomas Okonkwo's daughter can do." That night, Mira sat alone in her quarters, her rifle disassembled on the cot before her. She cleaned each component with practiced precision, the ritual as familiar as breathing. Her father had taught her this when she was 4 years old, back when the rifle was bigger than she was. He had placed her tiny hands on the stock and shown her how to feel the weapon, how to understand it, how to make it an extension of herself. She had won her first junior national championship at 12. By 15, she was outscoring adults twice her age. At 18, she became the youngest graduate of the Army Sniper School in modern history, setting records that still stood. None of that mattered here. Here, she was just a child playing soldier in a world of giants. The mess hall had been worse than the landing zone. She had walked in to get food, and the conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Someone had started humming a nursery rhyme. Someone else had asked loudly if the base had a daycare program they did not know about. When a young Afghan interpreter stumbled and spilled water near her table, one of the SEALs had shoved him hard, sending him sprawling. Mira had stood up, had walked over, had helped the interpreter to his feet while the SEAL watched with an ugly smile. She had not said a word, had not needed to. Her eyes had said enough. The SEAL had backed down, but she had seen his face, had seen the promise of payback waiting there. She finished reassembling her rifle and set it aside. From her pocket, she drew the rosary, its beads worn smooth by decades of use. Her father's hands had held these same beads, had prayed these same prayers. In this same province, 5 years ago, before an IED had taken him from her forever. Sleep came slowly and brought no peace. At 05:30, she walked to the range in the gray pre-dawn light. Ghost was already there, his rifle set up on a bench, his expression unreadable. Harker stood nearby with 3 other SEALs, arms crossed, waiting for the show. Mira took her position and began her preparations. She did not look at them, did not acknowledge their whispered jokes or their barely concealed smirks. She had a point to prove, and she would prove it the only way she knew how. One shot at a time. The first target was set at 800 meters. Standard qualification distance. Ghost fired first, his shot punching clean through the center of the silhouette. He cycled his bolt without looking at Mira, his expression bored. Mira settled behind her rifle. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow, found the stillness between seconds. Her finger brushed the trigger like a lover's touch. The shot cracked across the range. Dead center, identical to Ghost's. Harker said nothing. He gestured to one of his men, who jogged downrange to reset the targets and move them back. 1,000 meters. Ghost fired. Center mass. Mira fired. Center mass. 1,200 meters. The same. 1,500 meters. Ghost's shot drifted slightly left, still a kill, but no longer perfect. Myra's round found the exact center of the target. Ghost glanced at her for the first time. Something had changed his eyes. The boredom was gone, replaced by something that might have been curiosity. Harker's jaw tightened. He waved his hand. Further. 1,800 meters. Over a mile. The targets were barely visible now, shimmering in the heat that was already building despite the early hour. Wind had picked up, swirling unpredictably across the Afghan desert. Ghost took his time. He studied the wind, adjusted his scope, breathed through 3 cycles before firing. The round struck the target's shoulder. A wound, not a kill. The SEALs shifted uncomfortably. Ghost was their best. He did not miss. Mira did not rush. She read the wind the way her father had taught her, watching the dust, feeling the air on her skin, calculating variables that existed more in instinct than mathematics. The scope told her one thing. Her gut told her another. She trusted her gut. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Nearly 3 seconds of flight time. An eternity for a bullet to travel, for wind to push it off course, for gravity to drag it down. The round punched through the center of the target. Silence hung over the range. Ghost stared downrange, his face unreadable. The other SEALs exchanged glances. Harker's expression had hardened into something cold and fixed. Lucky shot, he said finally. Anyone can hit paper, specialist. Paper does not shoot back. Paper does not move. Paper does not make you watch your friends bleed out while you freeze. He stepped closer, looming over her. You want to impress me, do it in the field. Until then, you're a tourist with a rifle. He turned and walked away. The other SEALs followed, though Ghost lingered for a moment. He studied Mira with an intensity that felt like an evaluation rather than a dismissal. Where did you learn to shoot like that? He asked. My father taught me. Ghost nodded slowly. He's a sniper too. He was, Mira said, past tense, heavy with everything she did not say. Something shifted in Ghost's expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of shared loss. He had his own ghost, she suspected. Everyone here did. What happened to him? Myra's hand found the rosary in her pocket. IED, she said quietly. 5 years ago. Kinner province. Ghost's eyes widened slightly. You mean here? This AO. She did not answer. She did not need to. Ghost looked at her differently now, seeing not a child playing soldier, but something else entirely. A daughter walking in her father's footsteps. A ghost hunting ghosts. That is why you requested this deployment, he said. It was not a question. Mira began breaking down her rifle, her movements precise and mechanical. I go where the army sends me, petty officer. Ghost watched her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He crouched beside her, lowering his voice so the departing SEALs could not hear. Harker lost 2 men last year, he said. Army attachment froze during contact. Good kid, just could not handle it when the shooting started. One of our guys tried to cover him and took a round through the throat. Bled out before medevac could reach us. Myra's hands stilled on her rifle. He is not trying to be cruel, Ghost continued. He is trying to protect his team. He looks at you and sees that kid. Sees another frozen soldier, another dead friend. That does not make it right, Mira said. No, Ghost agreed. It does not, but it makes it understandable. He stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. Prove him wrong, specialist. Not with words, with actions. He almost smiled. That shot at 1,800 meters was not luck. I have been sniping for 6 years, and I have never seen anyone red wind like that. He walked away, leaving Mira alone on the range. That evening, she found a quiet spot behind the communications building, a small patch of darkness where she could see the stars without the base lights washing them out. The Afghan sky was impossibly vast, impossibly clear, the same stars her father had watched from this same province 5 years ago. She remembered nights on the family farm in Georgia, her father pointing out constellations while her mother prepared dinner inside. He would set up targets at impossible distances, and they would shoot until the light failed. Then they would sit in the growing darkness, and he would tell her about the men he served with, the places he had been, the things he had learned about himself in the crucible of combat. You will face moments that define you, he had told her once. Moments where everything you think you know about yourself gets tested. When those moments come, do not think. Just be who you are. Your training will take over if you let it. She had been 14 when he died. Too young to really understand, old enough to feel the loss like a physical wound. Her mother had wanted her to quit shooting, to put away the rifles and the memories, and try to live a normal life. But there was no normal life for Mira. There never had been. She was her father's daughter, and his path was her path, and it had led her here, to this dusty outpost at the edge of nowhere, surrounded by men who thought she was a joke. Footsteps approached. She did not turn, recognizing the gate. Master Sergeant Vance lowered himself to the ground beside her, groaning slightly as his knees protested. Heard you made quite an impression on the range today, he said. Apparently not impressive enough. Vance chuckled softly. Harker is stubborn, but he is not stupid. He will come around. And if he does not, then you keep shooting. Keep proving yourself. That is what your father would have done. Mira looked at him. You said you served with him at Bragg. What was he like back then? Vance was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant with memory. Intense, he said finally. Focused. He had this way of looking at you like he could see straight through to your soul. Made some people uncomfortable. He smiled slightly. Made others feel like they could do anything. Mira nodded. She remembered that look. Remembered feeling invincible under its weight. He talked about you, Vance continued. All the time. Said you were the best natural shooter he had ever seen. Said you had something special, something that could not be taught. He paused. He said you would change everything if you ever got the chance. The words hit Mira harder than she expected. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry. She had not cried since the funeral. "There is something you should know," Vance said slowly. "Intelligence just identified a high-value target operating in this sector. Harker's team is being tasked with a direct action mission tomorrow night." Mira turned to look at him, and despite what he says, Vance continued, "The mission parameters require a designated marksman attachment. You're going outside the wire, specialist, whether Harker likes it or not." Something cold and sharp settled in Myra's chest. She thought of her father's rosary, the worn beads, and whispered prayers. She thought of the targets she had just destroyed on the range. Tomorrow, she would find out if she could do the same to men who shot back. The mission briefing took place in a plywood building that smelled of dust and diesel fuel. Maps covered the walls, red pins marking known enemy positions, blue pins marking friendly forces. Mira stood at the back of the room, invisible among the giants. Harker ran the briefing with cold efficiency. Target is a mid-level Taliban commander named Farid Massoud. He has been coordinating attacks on convoys along Highway 1 for the past 3 months. Intelligence puts him at a compound in the Karangal Valley. He tapped a photograph pinned to the map, showing a bearded man with hard eyes. "We insert by hello at 2200. Move to the compound on foot and either capture or eliminate the target." One of the SEALs raised his hand. "What about Overwatch?" Harker's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We have a designated marksman attachment." He did not look at Mira. "She will be positioned on the ridge east of the compound, providing long-range support." The SEAL who had asked the question glanced back at Mira, his expression skeptical. "That ridge is 1,500 meters from the target building. 1,700 from the secondary structures." Harker finally turned his gaze to Mira. "Is that going to be a problem, specialist?" Every eye in the room shifted to her. She felt their doubt, like a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, try to crush her into the floor. "No, Senior Chief," she said. "It will not be a problem." Harker held her stare for a long moment. Then he turned back to the map. "Insertion is in 6 hours. Get your gear ready." The SEALs filed out, talking among themselves in low voices. Ghost paused beside Mira on his way to the door. "That ridge he is putting you on," he said quietly. "It is exposed. No cover. If things go sideways, you will be alone up there with nowhere to hide." "I know." Ghost studied her face. "He is setting you up to fail. You understand that, right? If you cannot deliver from that position, you will have all the excuse he needs to send you back to Bagram." "Then I will deliver," Mira said simply. Ghost shook his head slowly, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "You really are not afraid, are you?" "Fear is a luxury, Specialist Okonkwo. My father used to say that. I have not had time for luxury since I was 14. She walked out before Ghost could respond. The hours before the mission passed in tense silence. Mira checked her equipment 3 times, then checked it again. Rifle, scope, ammunition, radio, water, first aid kit. Everything had to be perfect. There was no room for error. She was performing her final equipment check when she noticed something wrong. Her scope's elevation turret was slightly off. The calibration marks no longer aligned properly. Someone had adjusted it. Not by much, just enough to throw off her shots at long range. Just enough to make her miss when it mattered most. Mira stared at the tampered scope for a long moment. She thought about reporting it, about confronting Harker or whoever had done this. But she knew how that would play out. Accusations without proof. Her word against theirs. The crazy little girl making excuses before she even got to the field. Instead, she simply recalibrated the scope herself. She ran the adjustments 3 times to make sure they were perfect, then packed her gear and said nothing to anyone. If they wanted her to fail, they would have to try harder than that. The helicopter insertion went smoothly. They touched down in a dry riverbed 2 kilometers from the target compound. The rotor washed, kicking up clouds of dust that tasted like chalk. Mira moved with the team through the darkness, her small frame actually an advantage as she slipped through gaps in the terrain that the larger SEALs had to navigate around. Harker set a brutal pace, pushing hard through the rocky Afghan terrain. Mira kept up without complaint, her legs burning, her lungs aching in the thin mountain air. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. They reached the ridge at 23:30. The compound lay below them, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. Lights flickered in two of the windows. Somewhere inside, Fard Massoud was sleeping or planning or praying, unaware that death had come to his doorstep. Harker pointed to a position at the far end of the ridge. "You sit up there. Do not fire unless I give the order, or unless you see an immediate threat to the team." He leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And try not to shoot any of my men." He moved away before she could respond. Mira made her way to the designated position and began setting up. The ridge was exactly as Ghost had described. Exposed, windswept, with nothing but loose rocks for cover. If the enemy spotted her muzzle flash, she would have nowhere to run. She pushed the thought aside and focused on her rifle. Range to primary building, 1,400 meters. Range to secondary structures, 1,600 to 1,700 meters. Wind from the southeast at 8 to 12 knots, variable. Temperature dropping as the night deepened. She settled into position and began her watch. The seals moved like shadows through the darkness below. Mira tracked them through her scope, impressed despite herself by their fluid coordination. Whatever she thought of Harker personally, he ran a tight team. They reached the compound wall without incident. Two seals boosted over, disappearing into the courtyard beyond. Radio chatter was minimal, just soft clicks indicating positions and status. Then everything went wrong. The first shots came from the north, a direction no one had been watching. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as a Taliban patrol stumbled directly into the SEAL position. The element of surprise evaporated in a heartbeat. "Contact north." Harker's voice crackled over the radio. "2 tangos down, more incoming." Mira swept her scope across the terrain, searching for targets. The firefight was close quarters, too close for her to engage without risking friendly fire. She watched helplessly as the SEALs fought their way toward the compound, taking fire from multiple directions. Then she saw them. 3 fighters moving along a drainage ditch to the west, flanking the SEAL position. The team was focused on the threat to the north. They did not see the men creeping up on their exposed side. Mira keyed her radio. Overwatch to actual. 3 tangos approaching from the west. Request permission to engage. Static. Harker was busy. The flanking fighters were 200 meters from the nearest SEAL and closing. She did not have time to wait. The first shot dropped the lead fighter at 1,400 meters. The second shot took the man behind him before he could react. The third fighter dove for cover, but Mira had already adjusted. The round caught him in the chest as he hit the ground. 3 shots, 3 kills, less than 4 seconds. The radio crackled to life. "Who took those shots?" Harker's voice was sharp with anger. "I do not authorize weapons free." "Overwatch," Mira responded calmly. 3 tangos eliminated. "Your western flank is clear." Silence stretched across the radio. Below, the firefight continued, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Mira returned to scanning for targets, her heart pounding but her hands steady. The mission continued for another 20 minutes. Fard Massoud escaped in the chaos, slipping out a back entrance while the SEALs were engaged at the front. One SEAL took a round through the shoulder, serious but not fatal. By the time the medevac helicopter arrived, the compound was clear and the enemy had melted back into the mountains. Harker did not speak to Mira during the extraction. He did not speak to her on the helicopter ride back to base. He did not speak to her as the wounded SEAL was rushed to the medical station. But when they gathered for the debrief, his eyes found hers across the room. "You fired without authorization," he said flatly. "I eliminated a threat to your team. You could have hit one of my men. I did not." Harker stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "This is not a game, specialist. You do not get to make calls like that on your own. You follow orders or you go home." Mira met his gaze without flinching. "With respect, Senior Chief, if I had waited for orders, 2 of your men would be dead right now." She let that hang in the air. "I did my job. I will keep doing my job, and I will not apologize for saving lives." She turned and walked out, leaving Harker staring after her. Ghost caught up with her outside. He fell in a step beside her, quiet for a long moment. "Those shots you took," he said finally. 1,400 meters, moving targets at night. "I have never seen anything like it." Mira said nothing. "He will come around," Ghost continued. "He is angry because you were right, and he knows it. Give him time." "I do not need him to like me," Mira replied. "I just need him to let me do my job." She walked away into the darkness, her father's rosary pressed tight against her palm. 2 days passed without a word from Harker. Mira was not invited to team meetings. She was not included in planning sessions. She ate alone in the mess hall while the SEALs laughed and joked at their own tables, occasionally glancing her way with expressions that ranged from dismissive to openly hostile. She used the time to train. Every morning before dawn, she ran the perimeter of the base until her lungs burned. Every afternoon, she practiced on the range until her shoulder ached from recoil. Every evening, she studied maps of the surrounding terrain, memorizing every ridge and valley and potential sniper position within 20 kilometers. If they wanted to freeze her out, fine. She would be ready when they needed her again. On the third day, Chief Warrant Officer Renata Sadowski found her cleaning her rifle behind the communications building. Sadowski was 38 years old, an Army intelligence officer with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She was also one of only 3 women on the entire base. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Mira shrugged. "It is a free country, or at least it is supposed to be." Sadowski lowered herself to the ground, stretching her legs out with a sigh. "I heard about what happened on the Massoud mission. 3 confirmed kills at 1,400 meters at night, with no friendly casualties." Mira continued cleaning her rifle. "And yet here I am, scrubbing carbon instead of doing my job." "Welcome to the club," Sadowski said dryly. "You think the SEALs are bad. Try being a female intelligence officer telling infantry commanders that their plans are flawed. Half of them look at you like you just crawled out of sewer." Mira glanced at her. "How do you handle it?" "Same way you do, I imagine. I do my job better than anyone else can. Eventually, the results speak louder than the prejudice." She paused. "It helps to have allies, though. People who see your value, even when others refuse to." Mira thought of Ghost, of Vance. Maybe she was not as alone as she felt. "There is something else," Sadowski continued, her voice dropping. "We have new intelligence on a high-value target. Someone much bigger than Fard Massoud." Myra's hands stilled on her rifle. "His name is Haji Nazir." Sadowski pulled a photograph from her pocket, showing a weathered face with a gray beard and cold, calculating eyes. "He's been running operations in this province for over a decade. Bombings, ambushes, assassinations. He is responsible for the deaths of dozens of coalition soldiers." Mira stared at the photograph. Something cold settled in her chest, a sensation she could not quite name. The face was unfamiliar, but the name triggered a distant memory. A fragment of conversation overheard at her father's funeral, a name spoken in hushed, angry tones by men in uniform who had served with him. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked carefully. "Because Harker's team is going to be tasked with finding him, and because I think you deserve to know what you are getting into." Sadowski studied Myra's face. "You reacted to that name. Why?" Mira forced her expression to remain neutral. "I do not know what you mean." Sadowski held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just know that if you ever want to talk, I am here." She stood and walked away, leaving Mira alone with the photograph and the cold weight in her chest. That evening, Ghost found her on the range. He set up his rifle at the station beside hers without asking permission and began firing at targets 800 meters downrange. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply shot, round after round, the rhythm of gunfire creating a strange kind of peace. Finally, Ghost broke the silence. "Harker is watching us," he said, "from the operations building. I know. He does not like that we are talking." Mira chambered another round. "I do not particularly care what he likes." Ghost smiled slightly. "No, I do not suppose you do." He fired, hitting center mass. "I did some asking around. About your father." Myra's hands froze on her rifle. "Thomas Okonkwo," Ghost continued. "Staff Sergeant, 75th Ranger Regiment. Deployed to Afghanistan 6 times. Killed in action in Khyber province 5 years ago. He paused. IED attack on a convoy near the village of Shul. Mira said nothing. Her throat had closed up, making speech impossible. Ghost turned to look at her. The village of Shul is about 15 kilometers from here. It is in the same sector where Haji Nazir operates. She forced herself to breathe, to speak. What are you saying? I am saying that Nazir Cell was responsible for most of the IED attacks in this area during that time period. Ghost's voice was gentle but direct. I think you already knew that. I think that is why you requested this deployment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. My father was tracking someone, Mira finally said, before he died. He never told me who. He never told anyone. But I found notes in his things after. References to a target he called the Ghost of Khyber. Someone who had been killing Americans for years without ever being caught. Nazir. Mira nodded slowly. I did not make the connection until I got here. Until I started seeing the intelligence reports, the patterns of attacks. It is him. It has to be him. Ghost was quiet for a moment. Does Vance know? He knows my father died here. I do not think he knows about Nazir specifically. And Harker. Mira let out a bitter laugh. Harker does not care why I am here. He just wants me gone. Ghost shook his head. You're wrong about that. Harker cares about one thing above everything else, his team. If he thought you were a liability, you would already be on a transport back to Bagram. The fact that you are still here means some part of him recognizes your value, even if he cannot admit it. He has a strange way of showing it. Yeah, Ghost agreed. He does. But give him time. He will come around. Mira looked toward the operations building, where she could just make out Harker's silhouette in the window. He was watching them, evaluating, judging. There's a briefing tomorrow morning, Ghost said. New mission. Harker has not decided whether to include you yet. What changed? Ghost smiled grimly. Command is pushing hard on Nazir. They want him found and eliminated. And whether Harker likes it or not, you're the best long-range shooter on this base. He stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. Get some sleep, specialist. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He walked away, leaving Mira alone with the setting sun and the ghosts of her past. That night, she dreamed of her father. They were on the farm in Georgia, shooting at targets in the fading light. He was laughing at something she had said, his face young and unlined and full of life. Then the dream shifted. The farm became a dusty Afghan road. The targets became men with guns. And her father was not laughing anymore. He was looking at her with sad, knowing eyes. Finish what I started, he said. Promise me. She woke with tears on her cheeks and his name on her lips. The morning briefing confirmed everything Ghost had said. The target was Haji Nazir. The mission was reconnaissance and potential direct action. And despite Harker's obvious reluctance, Myra's name was on the roster. She was going after the man who had killed her father. One way or another, this would end. Vance was waiting for her outside the briefing room. His face was grave, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. We need to talk, he said. Privately. They walked to a quiet corner of the base, behind the generator building where the constant hum of machinery would mask their conversation. Vance leaned against the concrete barrier and studied her for a long moment before speaking. I know about Nazir, he said. I know what he did to your father. Mira felt the words hit her like physical blows. How? I made some calls after you arrived. Talked to some people who were in the area when Thomas was killed. Vance's voice was heavy with old grief. The IED that hit his convoy was not random. It was targeted. Someone fed Nazir Cell information about the route, the timing, everything. Your father was specifically marked for death. Why? Because he was getting close. Vance pulled a worn envelope from his pocket. I should have given you this sooner, but I wanted to be sure. This was recovered from your father's personal effects after the attack. It was sealed, addressed to his commanding officer, but it never made it up the chain. Someone buried it. Mira took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her father's familiar handwriting. The sight of it, the loops and angles she had known her entire life, made her chest ache. She read the words slowly, carefully. I have identified the network responsible for the attacks in Sector 7. The commander is a man known locally as Haji Nazir. He operates from multiple locations, but maintains a primary compound in the Shul Valley. I have attached coordinates and surveillance notes. Request permission to plan a direct action mission. If we move quickly, we can end this. If we wait, more soldiers will die. The letter was dated 3 days before her father's death. He knew, Mira whispered. He knew where Nazir was. He was trying to stop him. Vance nodded, and someone made sure that letter never reached anyone who could act on it. By the time the intelligence was rediscovered months later, Nazir had moved. He has been a ghost ever since. Until now, Vance agreed. He looked at her with something between concern and understanding. Mira, I need to know that you can handle this, that you could be professional. Personal feelings have no place on a mission like this. You think I'm going to freeze? You think I'm going to let my emotions compromise the team? I think you're a human, Vance said gently, and I think you have been carrying this weight for 5 years. That is a long time to hold on to pain. Mira folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket, next to her father's rosary. I will not freeze, she said. I will not compromise the mission, but I'm going to finish what my father started. One way or another, Nazir dies. Vance held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then God help anyone who gets in your way. The mission launched at nightfall. 3 helicopters carrying Harker's team, an Afghan commando unit, and support personnel swept low over the mountains toward Nazir's suspected location. Mira sat in the back of the lead bird, her rifle across her lap, her mind surprisingly calm. The plan was straightforward. Afghan commandos would establish an outer perimeter while the SEALs assaulted the main compound. Mira would provide overwatch from a ridge 2,400 meters to the east, covering the primary approach and potential escape routes. 2,400 meters, nearly a mile and a half, at the extreme edge of her rifle's effective range. Harker had not even pretended it was anything other than another attempt to sideline her. But Mira did not care. She would make it work. She always did. They touched down in a narrow valley and began the long march to their positions. The night was cold and clear, stars blazing overhead like scattered diamonds. Mira moved silently through the darkness, her small frame slipping between rocks and shadows with practiced ease. She reached her position 2 hours before the assault was scheduled to begin. The ridge offered a commanding view of the valley below, where Nazir's compound sprawled across a rocky plateau. Lights flickered in several windows. Guards patrolled the perimeter walls. Somewhere inside those mud brick buildings, the man who had killed her father was sleeping or planning or praying. Mira set up her rifle and began her calculations. Range to main building, 2,300 meters. Range to escape vehicles, 2,450 meters. Wind from the northwest at 6 knots, steady for now, but likely to shift as the temperature dropped. She had made shots at this distance before, in training, on ranges, never in combat, never against living targets who would shoot back. There was a first time for everything. The radio crackled softly. All elements in position. Commence operation on my mark. Mira pressed her eye to the scope and watched the shadows begin to move. The first sign of trouble came from the north. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness 200 meters from the Afghan commando position. Someone was shooting at forces that should not have been detected yet. Contact north, a voice barked over the radio. We have been compromised. Enemy forces engaging from prepared positions. Mira swept her scope across the terrain, her heart sinking. This was not a chance encounter. The Taliban had been waiting for them. They had known the assault was coming. All elements. Harker's voice was tight, with controlled fury. We are walking into an ambush. Fall back to Rally Point Alpha. But it was too late. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously. The Afghan commandos were pinned down, taking casualties. The SEALs were caught in a crossfire, fighting for every meter of ground. Mira searched desperately for targets, but the chaos below made it impossible to distinguish friend from foe. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness. Tracers crisscrossed the valley like angry fireflies. Men were screaming, dying, and she could do nothing but watch. Then her radio sparked and died. A burst of static, then silence. She checked the connections, found nothing wrong. The unit itself had failed, the electronics fried by what must have been a manufacturing defect or damage during insertion. She was blind, deaf, alone on a ridge with no way to communicate with her team. Below, she watched through her scope as a SEAL went down, clutching his leg. Another dragged him toward cover while a third laid down, suppressing fire. They were being pushed back, overwhelmed by superior numbers. Mira made a decision. She could not coordinate with the team, but she could still shoot. She could still make a difference. She found a target, a Taliban fighter moving to flank the SEAL position. 1,400 meters. She fired. The man dropped. Another target. 1,600 meters. Another kill. She worked methodically, eliminating threats wherever she could identify them. But without radio communication, she had no way of knowing where friendlies were moving. Every shot was a gamble. Then she saw it through her scope. A SEAL running toward cover, directly in line with her next target. She adjusted, tried to find an angle that would not endanger him. She fired. The round struck the ground less than a foot from the SEAL's head, showering him with debris. He dove for cover, looking wildly around for the source of the shot. The radio in his hand crackled. Even from 2,400 meters, Mira could see him speaking into it, his face twisted with fury. Harker's voice came through on the emergency frequency that still worked in her headset. Cease fire, cease fire. Whoever is shooting from the East Ridge, you almost killed one of my men. Myra's blood ran cold. She keyed her damaged radio, hoping something would transmit. Overwatch to actual. Radio malfunction. I cannot coordinate. I'm trying to provide support. Nothing. The radio was dead. She watched helplessly as the extraction was called. Watched as helicopters swept in under heavy fire. Watched as wounded men were loaded aboard while others provided covering fire. The mission was a disaster. Nasir had escaped. One SEAL was critically wounded, and Mira had nearly killed a friendly. She made her way down from the ridge alone, arriving at the extraction point just as the last helicopter was loading. Harker stood at the ramp, his face a mask of cold fury. You, he said, pointing at her. You almost killed my man. My radio malfunctioned. I was trying to help. Help. Harker stepped closer, towering over her. You call that help? We walked into an ambush, and you were up there shooting blind. He shook his head in disgust. I knew you would get someone killed. I knew it from the moment I saw you step off that helicopter. He turned and climbed aboard, leaving her standing in the rotor wash. Ghost appeared beside her. He did not speak, just put a hand on her shoulder and guided her onto the helicopter. The flight back to base was silent. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her. When they landed, Mira walked to her quarters alone. She sat on her cot, her father's letter in one hand and his rosary in the other. Nasir was still out there. Her father's killer was still breathing, still planning, still murdering. And she had failed. The tears came then, hot and bitter, soaking into the worn beads of the rosary. For the first time since she was 14 years old, Mira Okonkwo allowed herself to cry. The next morning, Mira was summoned to the operations building. She walked across the base with her head high, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her. The story of the near miss had spread through the FOB like wildfire. She was no longer just a little girl playing soldier. Now she was the little girl who almost killed a SEAL. Harker was waiting inside, along with Vance and the base commander, an army colonel with tired eyes and a stack of paperwork on his desk. Specialist Okonkwo, the colonel began. There have been serious concerns raised about your performance on last night's operation. Sir, my radio malfunctioned. I was attempting to provide support without communication capabilities. It was not ideal, but I made the best decisions I could with the information I had. You nearly killed one of our operators. Harker cut in. His voice was flat, controlled, but his eyes burned with barely contained fury. An inch to the left, and Petty Officer Reeves would be dead right now. An inch to the left, and 2 Taliban fighters would have flanked his position and killed him anyway, Mira replied. I was not shooting randomly. I was eliminating threats. The colonel raised his hand, silencing them both. Regardless of intentions, the result is that we have a failed mission, a critically wounded operator, and serious questions about coordination and judgment. He looked at Mira with something that might have been sympathy. Senior Chief Harker has requested that you be reassigned to Bagram, pending a formal review. The words hit Mira like a punch to the gut. Reassigned. Sent away. Removed from a fight before she could finish what her father started. Sir, she began. However, the colonel continued, that decision is being delayed pending new intelligence developments. He glanced at Harker. Chief Warrant Officer Sadowski has information that may be relevant to this discussion. The door opened and Sadowski entered, her face grim. She carried a folder marked classified in red letters. We have identified the source of the intelligence leak, she said without preamble. The ambush last night was not bad luck. Someone told Nazir we were coming. Mira felt the blood drain from her face. She already knew what Sadowski was going to say. The leak came from one of our Afghan interpreters. Sadowski continued. A young man named Farouk. He has been passing information to Nazir's network for at least 3 months. Farouk. The interpreter Mira had helped in the mess hall on her first day. The young man she had defended from the SEAL's harassment. Her act of kindness had been repaid with betrayal. He was arrested 2 hours ago, Sadowski said. Under interrogation, he revealed that Nazir knew about our operation before we even launched. He knew our insertion points, our assault plan, everything. She paused. He also revealed something else. The room went silent. Nazir is planning to relocate, Sadowski continued. He knows we are hunting him. He is moving to a new safe house in Pakistan within the next 48 hours. Once he crosses the border, he is beyond our reach. 48 hours. 2 days to find and eliminate the man who had killed her father. 2 days before he disappeared forever. Where is he now? Harker asked. Sadowski spread a map on the table. Based on Farouk's information, Nazir is currently at a compound in the Upper Shul Valley. Here, she pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled against a steep mountain slope. The problem is access. The only viable approach is heavily defended. Any ground assault would be detected long before we could reach the target. What about aerial? The colonel asked. Negative. The valley is too narrow for helicopter insertion, and the compound is built into the mountainside. Airstrikes would require precision we cannot guarantee without eyes on target. Mira studied the map, her mind racing. The compound was situated in a natural fortress, protected by terrain on 3 sides. The only clear line of sight was from a ridgeline to the east, a jagged peak marked on the map as Widow's Peak. What about a sniper? She asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. The eastern ridge, she continued, pointing to the map. Widow's Peak. It has direct line of sight to the compound. If someone could get into position there, they could provide overwatch for an assault or take out high-value targets directly. Harker shook his head. That ridge is over 2,600 meters from the target compound. No one can make a consistent shot at that range. My father did, Mira said. His voice was calm, certain. He made a shot at 2,580 meters during a training exercise. It was a record that stood for 6 years. Training is not combat, Harker replied. No, Mira agreed. It is not. But he taught me everything he knew. She met Harker's eyes. I can make that shot. Silence hung in the room. The colonel looked from Mira to Harker to Sadowski, weighing options that all seemed impossible. There is another problem, Sadowski said. The approach to Widow's Peak is exposed. Anyone attempting to climb, it would be visible from the valley floor for at least 2 hours. We would need a major distraction to cover the movement. Or we do it at night, Mira said. One person, moving alone, could reach the summit before dawn. Set up position and wait for Nazir to show himself. One person, Harker repeated. Alone, with no backup and no extraction plan. That is suicide. Mira turned to face him fully. Maybe, but it is also the only chance we have. The colonel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Even if I approve this, and I'm not saying I would, you are currently under review for last night's incident. I cannot authorize you for combat operations. Then do not authorize it, Mira said. I will go off the books. If I succeed, Nazir is dead. If I fail, you have deniability. That is not how this works, specialist. With respect, sir, That is exactly how this works. Myra's voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. 5 years ago, my father identified Nazir as a threat. He tried to stop him and was killed for it. His intelligence was buried. His death was just another number in a casualty report. She paused. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Harker stepped forward. You're out of line, specialist. Maybe, Mira agreed. But I'm also right. And somewhere inside that stubborn head of yours, you know it. Before Harker could respond, Vance spoke for the first time. I will go with her. Everyone turned to stare at him. Not to the peak, Vance clarified. But I can provide support from a secondary position. Coordinate communications. Arrange extraction if things go sideways. He looked at Mira. Thomas Okonkwo was my friend. If his daughter is going to finish what he started, she is not doing it completely alone. The colonel was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and rubbed his temples. This conversation never happened, he said finally. Whatever you do in the next 48 hours is entirely unofficial. If you succeed, we will figure out how to explain it later. If you fail, I never heard of any of this. He stood and walked out of the room without looking back. Sadowski handed Mira the folder. Everything I have on Nazir's compound. Guard rotations, building layouts, probable locations within the structure. She hesitated, then added, I lost my brother to an IED. Different war, same enemy. Make this count. She left, leaving Mira alone with Harker and Vance. Harker stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. You are either the bravest soldier I have ever met or the craziest. He moved toward the door. If you survive this, we're going to have a long conversation about chain of command. Looking forward to it, Senior Chief. He paused at the threshold. Ghost was right about you. You really are not afraid of anything. He disappeared into the sunlight, leaving Mira with Vance and the map and the impossible task ahead. 2,600 meters. The man who killed her father. And 48 hours to end it all. Mira touched the rosary in her pocket. I'm coming, Dad, she whispered. One way or another, I'm going to finish this. Mira spent the afternoon preparing. She stripped her rifle down to its individual components, inspecting each piece for the slightest imperfection. She cleaned the barrel until the rifling gleamed. She checked her scope calibration 4 times, adjusting for the extreme range she would be shooting at. Every detail mattered. At 2,600 meters, the smallest error would mean the difference between success and failure. Vance found her in the armory, surrounded by ammunition and equipment. You should eat something, he said. You have not had a meal since yesterday. Not hungry. He sat down across from her, watching as she carefully loaded rounds into magazines. Each bullet was inspected, weighed, measured. Only the most perfect specimens made the cut. Thomas used to do the same thing, Vance said quietly. Before a mission, he would disappear into himself, become completely focused on the task ahead. Nothing else existed. Mira paused, a round held between her fingers. Did scare you, watching him like that? Sometimes, Vance admitted, there was an intensity to him that could be unsettling, like he was already somewhere else, already living in the moment of the shot. He smiled slightly, but also made him the best. When Thomas Okonkwo pulled a trigger, whatever he was aiming at died. She resumed, loading the magazine. He wrote about that in his journal, about finding the stillness, the place where everything else falls away. You have his journal. Mira nodded. My mother gave it to me after he died. She thought it might help me understand him better. She paused. It just made me miss him more. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. I have been holding on to this for 5 years, he said. I was not sure if I should give it to you. Was not sure if you were ready. Mira took the notebook, her heart suddenly pounding. The cover was stained with dust and something darker that might have been blood. Inside, the pages were filled with her father's handwriting. This was recovered from his personal effects, Vance explained. After the attack, it is his operational journal from his last deployment. His notes on Nazir, his surveillance observations, everything he learned before he died. Mira opened the notebook with trembling hands. The first pages were standard mission logs, observations about terrain and enemy movements. But as she flipped deeper, the entries became more focused, more obsessive. Target identified as Haji Nazir, 1 entry red. Confirmed responsible for 17 IED attacks in Sector 7. Operates through network of informants and local sympathizers. Extremely cautious. Never stays in one location more than 72 hours. Will require precision strike to eliminate. She turned more pages. Her father's frustration bled through the words. Request for action denied. Intelligence questioned by higher command. Bureaucratic delays while soldiers kept dying. Then she found the final entry, dated 3 days before his death. I know where he will be. Compound in Shoal Valley, coordinates attached. Window of opportunity is small. If we do not act now, he will disappear again. I have requested permission for direct action. Waiting for approval. If something happens to me before authorization comes through, someone needs to finish this. Nazir cannot be allowed to keep killing. He has to be stopped, no matter the cost. Below the entry, in smaller handwriting, her father had added one more line. If you are reading this and I am gone, know that I tried. Know that I love my family more than anything. And know that some fights are worth dying for. Mira closed the notebook. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She had cried herself out the night before. Now, there was only clarity, only purpose. He knew, she said softly. He knew he might not come back. He was a soldier, Vance replied. We all know that possibility exists. But Thomas believed in what he was doing. He believed that stopping Nazir was worth the risk. It was, Mira said, and it still is. She tucked the notebook into her pack alongside her father's rosary. 2 pieces of him, traveling with her into the darkness. That evening, Ghost appeared at her door. I heard about your plan, he said. The whole base is talking about it. The little girl who is going to climb Widow's Peak and shoot a ghost. News travels fast. Ghost leaned against the doorframe. Harker is telling everyone you are crazy, that you will get yourself killed and accomplish nothing. Probably, Mira agreed. But I'm going anyway. I know. Ghost studied her face. That is why I came. Not to talk you out of it. Just to say that you have proved something to me. Most people spend their whole careers trying to be half the soldier you already are. Mira looked at him in surprise. That is not what I expected you to say. What did you expect? Another lecture about chain of command. Another warning about knowing my place. Ghost shook his head. You want to know what I think your place is? He stepped closer. Your place is exactly where you are putting yourself. Behind that rifle, doing what no one else can do. He paused. Your father would be proud of you. I do not know him, but I know that much. Mira felt something loosen in her chest. A knot of tension she had been carrying for days. Thank you, she said quietly. Do not thank me yet. Ghost's expression turned serious. Thank me when you come back alive. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. If you make it to the top of that ridge and you get a shot at Nazir, do not hesitate. Do not think about your father or revenge or any of that. Just shoot. Let everything else fall away. Find a stillness, Mira said. Exactly. Ghost nodded once, then disappeared into the night. Mira finished her preparations alone. She loaded her pack with only the essentials. Rifle, ammunition, water, first aid kit. No food. She would not be up there long enough to need it. Either she made the shot and extracted, or she did not make it at all. At midnight, she slipped out of her quarters and made her way to the eastern perimeter. Vance was waiting at the gate, dressed in dark clothing with a small pack of his own. You sure about this? He asked. No, Mira admitted. But I'm going anyway. Vance nodded. I will be at the secondary position by dawn. Radio check every hour on the hour. If I do not hear from you by 0900, I will assume the worst and notify command. Understood. He put a hand on her shoulder. Come back alive, specialist. That is an order. Mira almost smiled. I will do my best, Master Sergeant. She turned and slipped through the gate into the darkness beyond. The mountain loomed ahead of her, a black mass against the star-filled sky. Widow's Peak, the place where Afghan snipers said anyone who climbed would die. She began to walk. The terrain was brutal. Loose rocks shifted under her feet. Steep inclines forced her to climb on hands and knees. The temperature dropped as she gained altitude, the cold seeping through her clothing and into her bones. But she did not stop, could not stop. Every step brought her closer to the man who had killed her father. Every meter of elevation gained was another meter toward justice. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, she had reached the base of the final ascent. Above her, Widow's Peak jutted against the dawn like a broken tooth. The last 500 meters would be the hardest. She rested for 10 minutes, drinking water and stretching muscles that screamed with exhaustion. Then she began the final climb. The sun was just cresting the horizon when she pulled herself onto the summit. Below, the Shul Valley spread out before her, still wrapped in morning shadows. And there, nestled against the mountainside, was Nazir's compound. Mira unslung her rifle and began setting up her position. The hunt was almost over. The compound sprawled across the valley floor like a wound in the earth. Mud brick walls surrounded a cluster of buildings, the largest of which was built directly against the mountainside. Guards patrolled the perimeter in lazy patterns, their weapons slung carelessly over their shoulders. They had grown complacent, confident that no one could reach them in this remote fortress. They were wrong. Mira settled into her position, arranging rocks and brush to break up her silhouette. At this distance, she was invisible to the naked eye, but a glint of sunlight off her scope or a careless movement could still give her away. She had one chance. She could not afford mistakes. She keyed her radio. Overwatch to support. In position. Eyes on target compound. Vance's voice crackled back, distorted by distance, but clear enough. Support copies. I have you on the secondary ridge. Good sight lines to your position. If anyone approaches from the east, I will see them. Copy that. Beginning observation. Mira pressed her eye to the scope and began a systematic survey of the compound. She counted guards, noted their positions and rotation patterns, identified potential escape routes and choke points. Her father's journal had included detailed notes on Nazir security protocols. So far, everything matched, but there was no sign of Nazir himself. The morning stretched into afternoon. The sun climbed higher, beating down on her exposed position with merciless intensity. Sweat soaked through her clothing. Her muscles cramped from holding the same position for hours. Dehydration began to fog her thoughts. She did not move, did not drink, did not allow herself any comfort that might compromise her concealment. Through her scope, she watched the compound come alive. Fighters emerged from buildings, gathering in small groups to talk and smoke. Vehicles came and went through the main gate. Women in burqas carried water and food between structures. Still no Nazir. At 1400 hours, her radio crackled. Support to Overwatch. I'm picking up chatter on local frequencies. Something about a convoy approaching from the north. Mira adjusted her scope, scanning the road that wound through the valley. Dust clouds rose in the distance, marking the approach of multiple vehicles. I see them, she reported. For vehicles. Technicals with mounted weapons. Possible VIP transport in the middle. The convoy grew larger as it approached, resolving into distinct shapes. 3 pickup trucks with heavy machine guns mounted in the beds, surrounding a white SUV with tinted windows. The formation screamed importance. Myra's heart rate increased. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to maintain the stillness her father had taught her. The convoy reached the compound gates and stopped. Guards rushed to open the barrier. Fighters emerged from buildings, lining up in what almost looked like a receiving line. Someone important was arriving. The SUV's doors opened. 2 bodyguards stepped out first, scanning the compound with professional vigilance. Then a third figure emerged from the back seat. Gray beard, weathered face, cold, calculating eyes. Haji Nazir. Myra's finger found the trigger. Her crosshairs settled on his chest. 2,600 meters. A shot she had never made in combat. A shot that would avenge her father and end a monster. She began her calculations. Wind from the northwest at 4 knots, lighter than yesterday. Temperature rising, which would affect bullet trajectory. Altitude difference between her position and the target, significant. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. At extreme range, you're not shooting at where the target is. You're shooting at where the target will be when the bullet arrives. You have to see the future. She adjusted her aim, compensating for all the variables. The crosshairs drifted above and to the left of Nazir's position. To an untrained eye, she was aiming at nothing, but she could see the invisible path the bullet would travel, could feel in her bones. One shot, one chance. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Then Nazir moved. He turned and walked toward the main building, surrounded by bodyguards. Within seconds, he disappeared inside. Mira exhaled slowly, releasing the tension in her trigger finger. The moment had passed. She would have to wait for another opportunity. The afternoon crawled by. The sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the valley. Mira remained motionless, her eye pressed to the scope, watching the compound for any sign of her target. Her radio crackled. "Support to Overwatch. We have a problem. Go ahead. I am picking up military radio traffic. American frequencies. Someone is searching for unauthorized personnel east of the wire." Myra's blood went cold. Harker. He had reported her absence, and now search teams were being dispatched. "How much time do I have?" "Unknown. But if they triangulate your radio signal, they will find you within the hour. Then I will have to work fast." She turned her attention back to the compound, scanning frantically for any sign of Nazir. The sun continued to sink. Shadows lengthened. Soon it would be too dark to shoot. Then she saw movement at the main building. The door opened. Bodyguards emerged first, scanning the courtyard. And behind them, Nazir himself. He was walking toward one of the vehicles, preparing to leave. Mira had seconds. She found her aim, made her calculations, adjusted for the dying light and the shifting wind. Her crosshairs settled on empty air above and to the left of her target. "Find the stillness," she whispered. "Let everything else fall away." Her heartbeat slowed. The world contracted to a single point of focus. There was nothing but the rifle, the scope, and the man who had killed her father. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The report echoed across the mountains. 2,600 meters away, the bullet began its journey. For seconds of flight time, an eternity for a projectile traveling faster than sound. Mira watched through her scope, not breathing, not blinking. The round struck the door of the SUV, 6 inches from Nazir's head. Mississippi Nazir threw himself to the ground. Bodyguards swarmed around him. Fighters throughout the compound grabbed their weapons and began scanning the mountainsides. And on Widow's Peak, Mira Okonkwo felt her heart stop. She had missed. At the moment that mattered most, she had failed. Below, chaos erupted. Men shouted and pointed. Some began running toward the eastern ridge. Others fired blindly into the mountains. They knew where she was. Or, at least, they knew the general direction. And they were coming. Mira had a choice. She could retreat, disappear into the mountains before they reached her position, live to fight another day. Or she could stay, adjust her aim, take another shot. She thought of her father, of his journal, of the words he had written 5 years ago. Some fights are worth dying for. Mira chambered another round and settled back into position. She was not finished yet. Mira blocked out the chaos below and focused on what had gone wrong. The wind had shifted at the last moment, a gust from the east that she had not anticipated. At 2,600 meters, even a slight change in wind speed could push a bullet off target by feet rather than inches. She would not make the same mistake twice. Through her scope, she watched Nazir being dragged toward the main building by his bodyguards. He was shouting orders, pointing toward the mountains. Fighters were already piling into vehicles, preparing to hunt her down. She had minutes at most, but Nazir was still exposed, still visible, still within range. Mira adjusted her aim, compensating for the wind shift. Her calculations ran through her mind like a prayer, the mathematics of death that her father had drilled into her since childhood. Distance, elevation, temperature, humidity, wind speed and direction, bullet drop, Coriolis effect, 2,600 meters. For 0.2 seconds of flight time, a target moving unpredictably through a crowd of bodyguards. Impossible. Except nothing was impossible. Not for Thomas Okonkwo's daughter. She found her aim and squeezed the trigger. The The round streaked across the valley and struck a bodyguard in the chest, dropping him instantly. Nasir disappeared behind a wall of bodies as his men shielded him with their own flesh. Mira cursed silently and chambered another round. The fighters were getting organized now. Two technicals roared out of the compound gate, heading toward the base of Widow's Peak. On foot, it would take them 30 minutes to reach her position. In vehicles, maybe 15. She did not have 15 minutes. Through her scope, she saw Nasir break from the crowd and sprint toward the main building. She tracked him, leading his movement, calculating where he would be when the bullet arrived. She fired. The round struck the doorframe inches behind him as he dove through the entrance. Another miss, but closer. Nasir was inside now, protected by thick mud brick walls. She could not reach him there. She would have to wait for him to emerge or find another way. The technicals were halfway to the mountain. Mira could see fighters in the beds, clutching weapons and staring up at the ridgeline. They would reach the base of the climb in minutes. Her radio crackled. Support to Overwatch. I am seeing movement on the eastern slope. Multiple hostiles approaching your position. You need to extract now. Negative, Mira replied. Target is still viable. I am staying. Mira, listen to me. Vance's voice was tight with urgency. You have at least 12 fighters heading your way. You cannot fight them all. I do not need to fight them all. I just need to kill one. She turned her attention back to the compound. Nasir was inside the main building, but he could not stay there forever. The vehicles in the courtyard were being loaded. He was preparing to run. If he got into one of those vehicles and drove away, she would never get another chance. Think, she told herself. What would Dad do? The answer came immediately. Her father would not wait for the target to come to him. He would force the target to move. Mira shifted her aim away from the main building and toward the vehicles in the courtyard. She found the lead SUV, the one Nasir had been walking toward before her first shot. She aimed at the engine block and fired. The round punched through the hood and the vehicle shuddered. Steam erupted from the ruptured radiator. One escape route eliminated. She shifted to the next vehicle and fired again. Another engine destroyed. In the compound, fighters were scrambling in confusion. They had expected her to target personnel, not equipment. By the time they understood her strategy, she had disabled 3 more vehicles. Now Nasir had a choice. Stay in the building and wait for his men to kill her, or flee on foot through terrain that offered no cover from a rifle. Movement at the main building. The door opened and fighters poured out, forming a human shield around a central figure. They were going to try to escort Nasir to one of the remaining vehicles on the far side of the compound. Mira watched them move, calculating angles and distances. The bodyguard were good, keeping Nasir covered from her direction, but they could not protect him from every angle at once. She waited, patient, still, her father's voice in her mind, teaching her the hardest lesson of all. The shot will come. It always comes. You just have to be ready when it does. The group reached the vehicle and began loading. For a moment, the formation shifted as men climbed into the truck bed. A gap appeared in the wall of bodies. Nasir's face, visible for half a second through the chaos. Mira fired. The round crossed 2,600 meters in 4.3 seconds. It passed through the gap in the bodyguards, threaded between 2 fighters climbing into the truck, and struck Nasir in the shoulder. He spun and fell, disappearing behind the vehicle. Hit, but not a kill. Mira chambered another round, searching for a follow-up shot. But the fighters had closed ranks around their fallen leader. She could not see him, could not tell if the wound was fatal. Her radio exploded with noise. Harker's voice, sharp and commanding. All call signs, this is actual. We have contact at grid reference 734. Friendly sniper engaged with hostile forces. Moving to support. Mira blinked in confusion. Harker was coming to help her. Below, the technicals had reached the base of the mountain. Fighters were dismounting, beginning the climb toward her position. She could see them through her scope, tiny figures scrambling over rocks and brush. She shifted her aim and began engaging. The first fighter dropped at 2,100 meters. The second at 1,900. The third tried to take cover behind a boulder, but she had already anticipated his movement. The round caught him as he dove. 3 shots, 3 kills, but there were more coming. Many more. In the compound, the remaining vehicle was moving. Someone had loaded Nazir inside and was driving toward the gate. If they escaped, if Nazir survived his wound and reached Pakistan, everything would have been for nothing. Mira made a choice. She ignored the fighters climbing toward her and focused on the fleeing vehicle. It was 2,400 meters away now, moving fast along the valley road. She tracked it through her scope, calculating lead distance. A moving target at extreme range. The hardest shot of her life. She fired. The round struck the front tire. The vehicle swerved violently, skidded off the road, and crashed into a drainage ditch. It did not move again. Mira allowed herself one breath of satisfaction. Then she turned back to the approaching fighters. They were close now, less than 500 meters. She could see their faces through her scope, twisted with rage and determination. She began firing. Methodical, precise, each shot finding its target. But there were too many of them, and they were getting closer. Her magazine ran dry. She reached for another, fingers fumbling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The fighters were 300 meters away now, close enough to hear their shouts echoing off the rocks. Then she heard something else. Helicopter rotors. 2 Black Hawks crested the ridge behind her, door gunners already opening fire on the approaching fighters. The enemy scattered, seeking cover as heavy machine gun rounds tore through their ranks. Harker's voice came over the radio. Overwatch, this is actual. Cavalry has arrived. Prepare for extraction. Mira slumped against the rocks, her rifle still clutched in her hands. Below, the crashed vehicle sat motionless in the ditch, and somewhere inside it, Haji Nazir was either dead or dying. She had done it. Against all odds, against every expectation, she had finished what her father started. The helicopters touched down on the ridge. SEALs poured out, securing the perimeter. Ghost reached her first, his face a mixture of disbelief and admiration. You crazy little monster, he said. You actually did it. Mira looked up at him, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Is he dead, she asked. Nazir, is he dead? Ghost's smile faded. We do not know yet. Team is moving to the crash site now. He helped her to her feet as the battle continued to rage in the valley below. The Black Hawk banked hard over the valley as Mira watched the compound burn below. Secondary explosions ripped through the buildings as ammunition caches ignited. Whatever infrastructure Nazir had built over a decade of terror was being erased in minutes. But none of that mattered if he was still alive. Ghost sat beside her, speaking into his radio over the roar of the rotors. She could not hear the words, but she watched his face for any sign of news. His expression remained unreadable. The helicopter set down on a flat stretch of ground near the crashed vehicle. SEALs had already established a perimeter, their weapons trained on the surrounding terrain. Mira jumped out before the skids fully touched earth, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. She had been in position for over 12 hours. Her body was screaming for rest, for water, for food. She ignored all of it and pushed toward the wrecked SUV. Harker was already there, standing over a body that had been pulled from the vehicle. He looked up as Mira approached, and for a moment their eyes met. He did not try to stop her. Mira stepped past him and looked down at the man on the ground. Haji Nazir lay on his back, his gray beard matted with blood. Her round had entered through his shoulder and torn through his chest cavity before exiting below his ribs. The wound was catastrophic, fatal, but he was not dead. Not yet. His eyes fluttered open, fixing on her face with fading recognition. His lips moved, forming words she could not hear over the noise of the helicopters and gunfire. Mira knelt beside him, bringing her ear close to his mouth. You, he whispered in accented English. You are the one, the girl on the mountain. Yes. His face twisted into something that might have been a smile or a grimace of pain. So small, so young. They sent a child to kill me. I'm not a child, Mira said quietly. I am Thomas Okonkwo's daughter. Something flickered in Nazir's eyes. Recognition, memory, understanding. The sniper, he breathed. The one who was getting too close. We had to stop him. You killed him, Mira said. You killed my father. Nazir's bloody lips curled upward. And now his daughter has killed me. He coughed, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps there is justice in this world after all. His eyes went glassy. His chest stilled. And just like that, it was over. Mira stayed kneeling beside the body, staring at the face of the man who had haunted her family for 5 years. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, had dreamed of vengeance, of closure, of the satisfaction that would come from ending the monster who had taken her father. She felt none of those things. She felt empty, hollow, like something vital had been carved out of her and discarded in the Afghan dust. A hand touched her shoulder. Harker, he is gone, Harker said. It is done. Mira nodded slowly. She could not find words. Harker helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. For a long moment, he studied her face with an expression she had never seen from him before, something that looked almost like respect. How old are you really? He asked. 19. Harker shook his head. 19 years old. He looked at the body on the ground, then at the burning compound in the distance. My best sniper has 6 confirmed kills in his career. You just dropped 15 in a single engagement. Mira followed his gaze. 15. She had not been counting, had not been thinking about numbers at all, just targets and threats and the mission that had consumed her entire existence. 15 confirmed kills, including the man who murdered her father. How did you do it? Harker asked. That last shot, moving target at 2,600 meters. I have never seen anything like it. My father taught me, Mira said simply. Harker was quiet for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Mira stared at it, uncomprehending. I was wrong about you, Harker said. From the moment you stepped off that helicopter, I was wrong. I saw a liability where I should have seen an asset. I saw a child where I should have seen a warrior. He kept his hand extended. I'm not good at apologies, but I'm good at recognizing when I have made a mistake. And I made a hell of a mistake with you. Slowly, Mira reached out and clasped his hand. His grip was firm, callous from years of combat. Thank you, she said, but I do not need your approval. Harker actually laughed at that. A short, surprised bark of genuine amusement. No, he agreed. You do not. And that is exactly why you have earned it. He released her hand and turned to coordinate the extraction. Mira watched him go, something loosening in her chest that she had not realized was wound so tight. Ghost appeared at her side. You look terrible, he said. I feel worse. Ghost grinned. Well, you shoot better than you look. So there is that. Despite everything, Mira felt the corners of her mouth twitch upward. The extraction took another hour. Bodies were photographed and tagged. Intelligence materials were gathered from the compound wreckage. Wounded fighters were secured for interrogation. Through it all, Mira sat on a rock near the helicopters, too exhausted to move, too wired to sleep. Vance found her there as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. He did not say anything at first, just sat beside her on the rock and watched the fading light. I killed him, Mira said finally. Nazir, he is dead. I know. It does not feel like I thought it would, she admitted. I thought I would feel satisfied, complete. Instead, I just feel tired. Vance nodded slowly. Revenge is like that. You spend so long chasing it that you do not know what to do when you finally catch it. What do I do now? Now, Vance said, you figure out who you are without the mission. He put a hand on her shoulder. Your father would be proud of you, Mira. Not because you killed Nazir, because you had the strength to finish what you started, even when everyone said it was impossible. Mira thought about that, about her father's journal, his words about fights worth dying for, about the rosary in her pocket, worn smooth by decades of prayers. She had carried his mission for 5 years. Now it was complete. The question was what came next. The helicopters lifted off as darkness fell, carrying them back toward FOB Cobra. Mira pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window and watched the mountains recede into shadow. Somewhere down there, Nazir's compound was still burning. Somewhere down there, her father's ghost could finally rest. And somewhere inside herself, Mira Okonkwo was beginning to imagine a future that was not defined by the past. The next 3 days passed in a blur of debriefings, medical evaluations, and official reports. Mira told her story a dozen times to a dozen different officers, each one asking the same questions with varying degrees of disbelief. She answered patiently, mechanically, her mind still processing everything that had happened on Widow's Peak. The base doctor had diagnosed her with moderate dehydration, muscle strain, and exhaustion. He had ordered 48 hours of bed rest. She had lasted 6 hours before restlessness drove her back to the range. She was putting rounds downrange at 800 meters when Ghost found her. "You know," he said, leaning against the barrier beside her lane, "most people take a break after killing 15 enemy combatants and eliminating a high-value target." Mira chambered another round. "Most people are not me." "No," Ghost agreed. "They are not." He watched her fire 3 more shots, each one punching through the center of the distant target. "Harker wants to see you," he said finally. "Operations building. Whenever you are ready." Mira lowered her rifle. "What does he want?" Ghost shrugged. "Did not say, but he has been on the phone with command all morning. Something big is happening." She safed her weapon and followed Ghost across the base. The operations building was busier than usual, personnel moving with purpose and urgency. Whatever was happening, it had stirred up the entire FOB. Harker was waiting inside, along with Vance, Sadowski, and several officers Mira did not recognize. They stopped talking when she entered. "Specialist Okonkwo," Harker said. "Thank you for coming." The formality in his voice was strange. "Wrong." She studied his face, trying to read what was happening behind his eyes. "Have a seat," he continued, gesturing to an empty chair. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight. Harker glanced at the other officers, then back at her. "The mission on Widow's Peak has attracted significant attention from command. Your actions resulted in the elimination of one of the most wanted terrorists in the Afghan theater, along with 14 additional enemy combatants. The intelligence recovered from the compound has already led to the disruption of 3 IED networks." Mira said nothing. She had not done it for recognition, had not done it for medals or commendations or career advancement. She had done it for her father. As a result, Harker continued, "Command has made several decisions regarding your future." Myra's stomach tightened. This was it. They were going to send her home. She had gone off the books, ignored orders, nearly gotten herself killed. No matter how successful the outcome, the military did not tolerate that kind of insubordination. First, Harker said, "The incident review regarding the previous mission has been closed. No adverse action will be taken." He paused. "The radio malfunction has been verified and documented. You were operating without communications in a combat environment and made decisions consistent with your training and judgment." Some of the tension drained from Myra's shoulders. Second, Harker continued, "You are being recommended for the Silver Star. The specific citation will reference your actions on Widow's Peak, including the longest confirmed kill in this theater of operations at 2,600 meters. Mira blinked. The Silver Star, the third highest combat decoration the military could award. "Third," Harker said, and he almost smiled, "you have been requested by name for attachment to a Joint Special Operations Task Force. Apparently word of your capabilities has spread. There are people at very high levels who want you on their team." Mira looked at Vance, who nodded slowly. "This is real, Specialist," Vance said. "You have options now, doors that were not open before." "What kind of options?" Mira asked. The officer she did not recognize spoke up. "Colonel Whitfield," he introduced himself. "I run a task force that operates across multiple theaters. We specialize in high-value target elimination, long-range precision work." He studied her with appraising eyes. "Your skills would be valuable to us." Mira considered his words. A new mission, a new purpose, the chance to keep doing what she did best. But there was something else she needed first. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked. Whitfield nodded. "Take a week. We will be in touch." The meeting ended. Officers filed out. Mira remained seated, staring at the wall, processing everything she had just heard. Ghost lingered by the door. "You okay?" "I do not know," she admitted. "I spent 5 years preparing for one thing. Now that thing is done. I do not know what I am supposed to feel. Ghost walked over and sat in the chair beside her. You feel whatever you feel, he said. There is no supposed to about it. He paused. When I made my first kill, I threw up for an hour afterward. Thought something was wrong with me. Took me a long time to realize that the reaction was not weakness. It was humanity. Mira looked at him. Does it get easier? The killing part, yes. The living with it part. Ghost shrugged. That depends on who you are and what you tell yourself about why you did it. I did it for my father, Mira said quietly. And for everyone Nazir would have killed if he had lived. Then you have your answer, Ghost replied. Hold on to that. He stood and extended his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. Come on, he said. The team is having a thing in the mess hall. Nothing official. Just some food and drinks, and people want to say thank you. Thank you for what? Ghost grinned. For saving our lives, 12. Multiple times. The least we can do is buy you dinner. Mira followed him out of the operations building and across the base. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. She had watched 1,000 sunsets from this place. But this one felt different. Lighter. The mess hall was crowded when they arrived. Every member of Harker SEAL team was there, along with Vance, Sadowski, and a dozen other personnel she had worked with over the past weeks. When she walked through the door, they rose to their feet. For a moment, she did not understand. Then Ghost put a hand on her shoulder and leaned close. It is called respect, he whispered. Get used to it. Harker stepped forward, a glass raised in his hand. To Specialist Okonkwo, he said, the toughest soldier I have ever had the privilege of being wrong about. Laughter rippled through the room. Glasses were raised. And for the first time since she had arrived at FOB Cobra, Mira felt like she belonged. The evening stretched on. Stories were shared. Jokes were made. Someone produced a battered guitar and began playing songs that Mira did not recognize, but found herself humming along to anyway. At some point, Vance appeared beside her with a cup of coffee. Your father would have loved this, he said quietly. Seeing you here, seeing what you have become. Mira wrapped her hands around the warm cup. I wish he could have. He can, Vance said, in his own way. He nodded toward the room, full of soldiers. This is his legacy, Mira. Not just taking down Nazir, but you, the warrior he raised. The example you have become for everyone in this room. She thought about that for a long moment. About legacies and purposes and the futures we build from the ashes of our past. I think I'm going to take Whitfield's offer, she said. Vance nodded. I figured you would. There is still work to be done. People like Nazir out there. People who need to be stopped. And you are the one to stop them. Mira looked around the room at the faces of the men and women who had doubted her, mocked her, tried to break her. Now, they were raising glasses in her honor. Somebody has to be, she said. 1 week later, the helicopter touched down at FOB Cobra carrying a passenger no one had expected. A 2-star general in crisp desert fatigues stepped onto the dusty ground, his aides scrambling to keep pace behind him. Word spread through the base like wildfire. Generals did not visit remote outposts like Cobra. Whatever had brought him here, it was significant. Mira was cleaning her rifle when Vance found her. Formation in 20 minutes, he said. Full dress. The general wants to meet you. Me specifically. You specifically. She changed into her cleanest uniform, the one she had been saving for occasions that never seemed to arrive. The fabric felt stiff and unfamiliar after weeks of combat gear. She studied herself in the small mirror on her wall and saw a stranger looking back. The girl who had stepped off the helicopter 3 weeks ago was gone. In her place stood someone harder. Someone forged in fire and tempered by loss. Someone who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. She was not sure if she liked what she had become, but she could not deny its necessity. The formation assembled in the main courtyard. Every soldier on base stood at attention, arranged in neat rows beneath the Afghan sun. At the front, a small platform had been erected, flanked by American flags that snapped in the mountain wind. General Harrison stood on the platform, his silver stars gleaming. Beside him stood Harker, Vance, and Colonel Whitfield. Their faces were solemn, ceremonial. Mira took her place in the front row, acutely aware of every eye on her. The SEALs who had mocked her stood at attention nearby. Ghost caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The general stepped forward, and the courtyard fell silent. "We are here today," he began, "to recognize extraordinary valor in the face of overwhelming odds. To honor a soldier who demonstrated courage, skill, and dedication far beyond what could reasonably be expected." He paused, letting the words settle over the assembled troops. "Specialist Mira Okonkwo," the general continued, "please step forward." Mira walked to the platform, her boots crunching on the gravel. Each step felt like a mile. Each heartbeat thundered in her ears. She climbed the steps and stood before the general, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The citation was read aloud. Every detail of the Widow's Peak mission laid bare for all to hear. The impossible climb, the hours of patient observation, the shots at ranges that should not have been possible, the 15 enemy combatants eliminated, the high-value target neutralized. The general lifted a medal from a velvet case held by his aide. The Silver Star, its ribbon bright against the desert backdrop. "For gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States," the general said, demonstrating extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for personal safety. Specialist Mira Okonkwo is awarded the Silver Star. He pinned the medal to her chest. The weight of it was slight, barely noticeable, but what it represented was immeasurable. The general leaned close. 2,600 meters, he said quietly. "That is the longest confirmed kill in this theater. You have set a record that may never be broken." "I was just finishing when my father started, sir," Mira replied. The general pulled back slightly, studying her face. "Thomas Okonkwo was your father?" "Yes, sir. I knew him," the general said. "We served together at Benning years ago. Good soldier. Better man." He paused. "He will be proud of you, specialist. Prouder than you can possibly imagine." The words hit Mira like a physical blow. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. "Not here. Not in front of everyone." "Thank you, sir," she managed. The general stepped back and addressed the formation. "Let this stand as an example," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "The size of the soldier does not determine the size of the fight. What matters is the heart, the will, the refusal to quit when everything says you should." He looked directly at Mira. "Specialist Okonkwo embodies everything we aspire to be. I am honored to have presented her with this award." The formation was dismissed. Soldiers crowded around Mira, offering congratulations and handshakes. She accepted them numbly, still processing everything that had happened. Eventually, the crowd thinned. Mira slipped away from the courtyard and made her way to the quietest corner of the base. The memorial wall, rows of names etched into metal plates. Soldiers who had given everything in this distant land. Her eyes found the one she was looking for. Staff Sergeant Thomas Okonkwo, killed in action, Kina Province. She touched the letters, feeling the grooves beneath her fingertips. The metal was warm from the sun. "I finished it, Dad," she whispered. "He cannot hurt anyone else." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the rosary. The beads were worn smooth by decades of prayers, first her father's and then her own. She had carried it through every moment of this deployment, through the mockery and the doubt and the impossible climb up Widow's Peak. Now was time to let it go. She placed the rosary at the base of the memorial, nestling it against the wall where it would rest with the other offerings left by grieving families. "I love you," she said. "I will make you proud. Every day for the rest of my life." She stayed there for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen as the sun began its descent. Footsteps approached. Ghost, keeping a respectful distance. "Transport leaves in an hour," he said quietly. "Whitfield wants you at Bagram by tonight." Mira nodded, but did not turn around. "I will be ready." Ghost hesitated. "You can be okay." She thought about the question, about everything she had lost and everything she had gained, about the father who had shaped her and the future that awaited. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I am." Ghost left her alone with her thoughts. An hour later, Mira stood at the landing zone with her pack slung over her shoulder. The helicopter that would carry her to Bagram, and from there to whatever came next, was warming up on the pad. Harker appeared beside her. 12, he said. She looked up at him. "Senior Chief." He extended his hand. It has been an honor. She took it. Likewise. He held her grip for a moment longer than necessary. If you ever need anything, he said, you know where to find us. I appreciate that. He released her hand and stepped back. Now get out of here before I say something sentimental. Mira almost smiled. Would not want that. She turned and walked toward the helicopter. Halfway there, she paused and looked back. The base sprawled behind her, dusty and utilitarian and utterly transformed by what had happened here. The SEALs who had laughed at her now stood watching her departure with something like reverence. The officers who had doubted her now spoke her name with respect. And somewhere, in whatever place awaited beyond this life, she knew her father was smiling. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who was underestimated because of how they looked and proved everyone wrong. Mira climbed into the helicopter and took her seat. Through the window, she watched FOB Cobra shrink into the distance as the aircraft gained altitude. She was 19 years old. She had 15 confirmed kills and a Silver Star. She had avenged her father and proven every doubter wrong. And she was just getting started. The helicopter banked toward Bagram, carrying her toward a future she could not yet imagine. Behind her, the mountains of Afghanistan stood eternal and indifferent, keeping their secrets as they had for thousands of years. But they would remember her. They would all remember her. The girl they called 12. The sniper from Widow's Peak. Thomas Okonkwo's daughter. Mira Okonkwo closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the rotors carry her home.